As the sun sets at the end of a New York workday, the mind transitions from daily tasks to the cloudier, more philosophical regions of social issues, culture, and politics. In a democracy, every perspective on the world is important, and people in art and culture have surprising bodies of knowledge that can shed fresh light on today's reality.
The following conversation with Ozier Muhammad took place on Manhattan's West Side on February 9th, 2022. Ozier Muhammad is a photojournalist living in Harlem, New York. The grandson of Nation of Islam founder Elijah Muhammad, he grew up among civil rights activists such as Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali, and photographer Gordon Parks. Working for Jet, Ebony, and the New York Times, Muhammad covered the campaigns of Nelson Mandela, Barack Obama, and won a Pulitzer Prize for his photographs of famine in Africa. You grew up in Chicago, and you grew up among the Nation of Islam community, your grandfather, your own father.
Growing up in the community, I felt that the sort of the sting of the controversy, because not only were whites hostile to us when they found out we were members of the Nation of Islam. If I was out in the world, if I was applying for, trying to get a job at some department store or, even a local pharmacy or something like that, they asked me about my name and things. So that's why do you have a name like that? And even with the African American middle class, the Christian community more or less, there was definitely some negative reactions.
It's kind of a choice between, a very kind of fiercely proud Black history, separatist idea versus more integrationist or something? Is that where the split would happen in the Black community?
I guess for the most part, there's always been sort of that dichotomy, from the time of Du Bois and Booker T. Washington around the turn of the 19th and into the 20th century. When Du Bois was more a nationalist, I should say, and Booker T. Washington was more of an accommodationist. Booker T. basically just wanted to get folks employed. It's like the Urban League of its time. In a way, I think Du Bois wanted to say, hey, we're on the same level as the Caucasian race. We can excel in the arts. We can excel in the sciences, etc. And
sort of proving by succeeding, right?
Right, we're not just an agrarian people.
Right.
But at any rate, personally, as far as me, initially I must say that I was worried about who I was when I went out into the greater society, and looked for jobs, When I looked for jobs, I was lucky to get my first gig at Johnson Publications, which published Ebony and Jet magazine, which were very popular in their time. When I left Ebony, I went to work for the so-called mainstream media, who went to Charlotte and worked for the Charlotte Observer, was my first newspaper job. I was really lucky that they took a chance with me, because, they might have thought that I was some kind of fringe person indoctrinated person who's going to come there and basically say all white people are blue-eyed devils.
There was a split in the nation at some point. Your own dad kind of steered it in a more like
no, my uncle,
Pacific.
My uncle Wallace. My uncle Wallace was the one who steered it from Black nationalism into the orthodoxy of Islam.
Right.
The discussion about that transition took place in my youth. And throughout my Uncle Wallace's life. He died in 2008, just before Obama's inauguration. I wish he could have seen that. He died in October 2008. It was expected among the inner circle that Wallace would eventually move the community from Black nationalism into religion. And because he denounced the teachings of his father as early as 1961.
Elijah Muhammad.
My grandfather, Elijah Muhammad. He said that, Dad, you need to tell the people that, make it very clear to them that you're not an emissary of God. God did not send my grandfather on a mission, but my grandfather was given that impression.
Right.
Using them, So that excommunicated him. I tried to, with the help of my Uncle Wallace, because I felt like I was really close to him. I admired him for making great sacrifices to to live by the book. Even though, in my own case, even though I tried to embrace religion, I even tried to embrace spirituality like Buddhism. My wife is a Buddhist. But I just couldn't stay there. You know, I've sort of moved on. And, but I admire people who have the faith and who live by the book, or who live in a spiritual realm. I admire them if they're good people,
Right.
as best I can determine.
Right.
You know, I'm no judge of who's good or bad, you know, but, or to me, that's all that matters.
Yeah, no, and indeed, a lot of religion around the world has been coerced by, you know, sort of political movements or domination over others. I mean, evangelicals in this country have done a lot of damage, and it seems very un-Christian to me, a lot of what's gone on, especially in the last 5 years. But I think just to jump now to photography, it seems to me that, like, documentary photography in particular, like, that is a empirical art form. Like, you are in the world looking at things. It's not necessarily a contradiction to spirituality, but it's a reality of its own, being in the world, watching social life, documenting what you see happening, and you've had a lot of experience doing that. Maybe you want to start with Gordon Parks. You knew him, right, from the circle of people.
It's interesting that you would go right to Gordon Parks, because he was actually my very first influence. I think that his best body of work was the body of work that he did covering the Nation of Islam and Muhammad Ali in the beginning of his professional fight career. Unarguably, some of the best photography work I've ever seen on the Nation of Islam. That's how I became first interested in the medium, seeing what he had done with just so many people in my immediate family circle, and then the community overall, and then Malcolm, and then Ali. I also got to meet him because I worked for Ebony and Jet, you know.
Oh, right.
The church community really helped get that magazine out there, as it had done with the Chicago Defender at the turn of the 19th into the 20th century, and also the Pittsburgh Courier, the two of the main African-American publications that had huge profile. They were like the Washington Post and the New York Times of their day. Among African-American folk.
Your earliest photographs are in Chicago, right? And it's like street photography and
Yes.
those things. I mean, so whatever problems you might have been having with your attachment to Nation of Islam or not having, you had a book, a portfolio book at some point, right? And people could see your photographs and decide whether you were a good photographer or not, and take you on those merits, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever displayed my work to Parks. We weren't that intimate, you know, I didn't get to know him that well. But I certainly let him know when I saw him how much he inspired me.
Yeah.
But it was not only him. Later on, it was Roy de Carava. And Roy de Carava and I we actually became close friends.
You went to Africa and spent time there on assignment. How did that come about?
I was in Africa with Josh Friedman and Dennis Bell, the two reporters from Newsday. We were all with Newsday. The idea was to start in West Africa, look at Africa from across the Sahel. So starting in the West and working our way into Ethiopia. We started in Mali, and we covered Niger and Burkina Faso, those three countries. We were waiting for a clearance to go into Ethiopia because Ethiopia was celebrating its 10th anniversary of being a Soviet government, a government of socialism. And this guy named Haile Mengistu was the president of the country. And he let us in, and we went in initially thinking of covering the 10th anniversary of the communist revolution in Ethiopia, because Mengistu had declared, let's have a celebration. With 10 years, you know, 10 years we've been out of the Western Alliance orbit. We were hearing information that the country was suffering a severe drought, which was causing a famine, and the starvation was exacerbated by the fact that Mengistu was spending all this money on this celebration and ignoring the starving people in the other provinces. So we immediately wrapped things up in the West, and we went into Ethiopia. We were the first print journalist, I think maybe the first journalist, but I'm not sure of that, to break that story. And the Pulitzer Prize and came out of that. that experience.
There are so many interesting people you've covered: Nelson Mandela and his, election, and Obama and this country.
Yeah. Oftentimes, I'm asked, "What was the most important experience you ever had as a photojournalist?" And it's a hard answer to give because I've had so many fortunate experiences. But I covered Senator Barack Obama when he started to campaign for the White House in 2008, and that was a surprise, and I was grateful to have that opportunity. And also, what was really a surprise to me was to get an opportunity to cover South Africa and the first non-racial elections there. Mm-hmm. I haven't covered the news in the last 4 years, and at first I thought...
Is that a decision of your own? Or
Yes, it is. Actually, I left the New York Times like a week before Christmas in 2014, mm-hmm. and initially I was kind of chomping at the bit for the first year. You leave, you just left Mount Zeus, and you feel like, man, have I lost my mind? So it took me a year to get my bearings and find some balance in my life. But when I look back after the first year, I have absolutely no regrets of stepping off that fast lane with the Times, mm-hmm. because as it goes with newspaper photography, you do everything from soup to nuts. So one day you may be, at presidential inauguration or covering an earthquake in Haiti, and the next day you're photographing a bagel in a shop that's been made out of some special flour,
Uh-huh.
So I don't miss it at all, because it was like almost like trauma going from the big story to a story that, was on page 17 of the food section.
Right.
After the years of discernment of what works and what doesn't work, it's very rare that I come across a situation that's worth photographing. Mm-hmm. I'm a big lover of jazz, and that's where I spend most of my time. I photograph a lot of jazz musicians, mm-hmm. and I've done that since I was a teenager when I started in the business. Mm-hmm. Of photography, or in the medium of photography. Mm-hmm. And that's something that gives me a lot of pleasure. Oftentimes, young people will ask me, how do you develop the awareness, or how do you heighten your aesthetic sensitivity as a photographer? How do you cultivate that or nurture it? And I often tell them, I said, look, find something that you love that may meld into photography that you're absolutely certain that there's something beautiful about that. Mm-hmm. Find that and superimpose it on this medium, and challenge yourself to make it beautiful, or to make it dynamic, or to make it something that you won't forget.
An exhibition of Ozier Muhammad's photographs is on view until March 26th at Gallery Sophie Scheidegger in Paris, France. His work will be featured this spring in a group exhibition and book about Harlem at Hunter College's East Harlem Gallery in New York. The following conversation with Silas Riener took place in Roxbury, New York on February 1st, 2022. Silas Riener is a New York-based dance artist. He and his partner Rashawn Mitchell create performances ranging from highly choreographed multimedia stage productions to improvisational works for specific environments. Playing at the fluid boundaries of gesture and identity, they construct provisional utopias with their collaborators and audiences.
I started dancing seriously very late. I was in college already, but I wasn't looking for it. I don't know, I sort of tumbled into it.
You'd played soccer or something like that? I mean, sometimes athletes take dance classes.
I played soccer very seriously, and I ran very seriously. And when I got to college, I didn't want to be identified as a student athlete, I guess. So I was looking for some way to combine my long-standing, I guess, artistic or performative interests with my athletic interests. Mm-hmm. And lo and behold, there's a whole field that nobody told me about. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so that's when I sort of started taking classes and got involved in a student group and got more involved, and then sewed all the costumes for the student group, and then choreographed, and then took more dances, more dance classes.
Can you major in dance at Princeton?
No, it's Princeton has the equivalent of a minor program. It's a certificate program in dance, and I took like one dance class pretty much every semester starting my second year. And a person who is still in my life as a mentor, Rebecca Ozier, had come onto the faculty when I was a student. And that really, I think, represented like a shift or a kind of transformative change for me, that she was a working artist in New York. She had a company, she was a choreographer. So I felt like it was the first little glimmer of like, oh, this is how, this is like the keyhole. Yeah. I mean, that's what my parents, of course, were worried about the most.
I think there are certain fields, I'll just use the one I'm most familiar with, photography, where people often think that you don't actually need any real like training, like you have instincts for it or talent for it and that's it. Like any sort of intellectual training even or specifically is not useful.
There's no playbook. There's no one way to do it. There are a lot of different ways to be a dancer, and I think what attracted me to the world of like experimental dance was that I felt like I could bring all of that material that I had been studying or been reading or been seeing out in the world. I feel like I could draw all of it into that work. And so that felt tremendously like liberating in a way.
I imagine as a young dancer, you're kind of looking at like a menu of different choices within the dance world. Some people probably go into classical dance at a very early age. They're like Olympic athletes. But then you have other choices too, like different companies and what those personalities represent. Alvin Ailey and Twyla Tharp and Pina Bausch, one of my favorites. But Merce Cunningham is a very particular kind of dance sensibility. Was that an obvious choice for you? Did you gravitate toward that intentionally, or was it something you kind of got picked up by?
Good question. I think that I started dancing when I was 19, and so those classical paths felt a little bit more closed to me, but also the idea of making new work and being in new dances and like being part of something that was really being born or being defined while it was happening. Of course, I ended up in this company that has a huge amount of classicism embedded in it, but
modernism has lots of classicism.
Yeah, modernism, exactly. So we're dragging that spike in the ground.
Yeah, no, I think just to clarify, because if audience maybe doesn't know this, modernism is a reinvention of the classical world in a certain way. It's sort of rationalizing a lot of chaotic impulses of, different fields. But you see that tradition in modern dance, especially of mid-century.
At the time, this was when I was moving to New York in 2006, there weren't that many jobs that you could get that were full-time that promised that kind of menu. So I was looking, I wanted a job, I wanted to travel, and I wanted to be really interested in what was going on. And the Cunningham name had come up a number of times in my life. So I felt like the deeper I got into it, the more there was for me. It also was a total serendipitous moment because someone was leaving the company, and the way that the company worked, it was 14 dancers, and when someone left, that person got replaced. But that person leaving meant that I was able to join the company relatively quickly. So the whole thing kind of happened really, really fast.
I feel like the world has suddenly gone from seeming like it was well organized in a bourgeois capitalist way to being like a lot of flotsam and jetsam. Talk about the ways in which you and Rashawn have created sort of more androgyny in keeping with the times in your performances.
Okay, I'll try. Because dancing for Merce was my first job, really, it certainly informed in a big way a lot of my understandings or perspectives about like the presentational affect of the body on stage. And because we were almost always in a unitard, so a all over spandex bodysuit, it kind of changes you in your mind, not, I think, to erase the idea of gender or of like which lumps and where in your body. It kind of goes into the landscape of the background because there are so many other things that you're thinking about.
Minimalist, modernist aesthetic,
I guess. I mean,
right?
for me, it was always like, at least in Merce's work, the gender dynamics are very traditional in a lot of respects. The idea of gender, I think, is part of the fabric of how he made his work. We're just ourselves, we're people, we're evolving humans as well. And when we started making work together, we certainly wanted it to feel personal in a certain kind of way, partly because there are aspects of Merce's work that feel very impersonal in certain ways, or like, not that the dancers are interchangeable in every way, but everyone's dressed the same. It's not about that in some kind of way. So I think as young artists wanting to kind of be reactionary or, you know, walk in the opposite direction, I think we were really interested in portraying or like utilizing the body with really different mechanics, worths, and values.
I mean, there's a tension between, when you're watching any performance, a tension between that individual on stage you know is a real person and you're curious about, and this representation they're creating, some character, some figure.
Right. And I feel like, at best, we're all always holding all of the strings simultaneously in something like that, where it's like, yes, I am performing, I have a persona, maybe I have some story going on in my head of what's going on. It could be mythological, it could be fantastical, it could be completely mundane. But at the same time, I'm like, I'm also 5 feet away from you, and that person is doing that. Like, you're holding all of this information in your head simultaneously. And some of that is identity-based, and I think that maybe that's where some of the identity-based experimentation comes out. If you're like, no, I want to be this way right now, I think that's a reflection of how people relate to it in their lives as well.
In the Gagosian performance, for example, you guys were kind of like the partner look, androgynous sort of thing. Since then, you sprouted a mustache. Do you use pronouns, the two of you?
We do use pronouns. Everyone has to use pronouns. We use he pronouns, both of us. Although, I mean, I can't speak for Rashawn. I do think that I'm fine with any pronoun that a person wants to use for me. The reason I use he pronouns is I think that while I may not always feel or look like the smallest definition of what a person using a he pronoun would look like or sound like or act like, I feel like part of my interest is like suggesting that word itself could contain a larger set of maybe conflicting, maybe challenging ideologies. So for me, I mean, that's a totally kind of personal perspective on it. I'm interested in challenging how big he can be. And so that's where I'm at right now.
You and your partner, Rashawn Mitchell, have done a series of performances called Desire Lines, which I think pretty well manifests the idea that you can sort of make it up socially, but also physically with objects and other people in the space of the dance.
Yeah, well, I was going to root that idea in two, I think, kind of things that happened semi-simultaneously. One is that we had, in 2017, we had like a really big show. It was a multimedia performance, proscenium performance with 3D film and live projection. Charles Atlas, the visual artist, was our collaborator.
Was that that's in Watermill, right?
We started working at Watermill. We had a show at BAM. We went, toured the United States, toured the world with this piece called Tesseract. So it's like a whole insane visual feast.
Right.
And that project, I think, as we sort of tipped away from it into kind of the opposite, like, what if we didn't need any technological apparatus or any batteries or road cases or silver screens? What if we just used whatever we had in the room with us and we began to just work with those materials? That coincided with us moving up here to the Catskills. I think those two things really started to hybridize. And so the practice of Desire Lines, which is one part like You already have what you need, and just find a way to make that into a rigorous practice of improvisation with the materials in your space.
Seems to me like Desire Lines is a workshop of sorts for people to, without expressing any political views or strong social views of any kind, it's a situation where people, much like people on a desert island or something, would just have to get to work building something together.
It's funny that the more we've done these kinds of practices in group settings, the closer I feel like it gets to group therapy or like individual therapy, and I always feel like, oh gosh, I hope I'm not like scarring this person by revealing to them that like, oh, it seems like you really like stacking all those boxes in a row. I wonder what that says about you. Or how you're choosing to relate to the group by remaining aloof from the group.
Right.
But what ends up happening usually in these group settings is everyone interprets the invitation to participate in a different way. And so that is what has kept it endlessly interesting to me, because it's always a different, shifting volume of humans that were like, I don't know, just trying to prevent from hurting each other. And that's where I feel like it is actually political to invite humans into a space, into an idea of a group setting without prescribing how they have to participate.
In March, Rashawn Mitchell and Silas Riener will present a new work with Julie Tolentino at the Neighborhood Unitarian Universalist Church in Pasadena, California. In April, they present a work titled Retrofit as part of the Dance Space Project Platform 2022 in New York City.